Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much to the League of Women Voters, as well as City Club Tacoma. Okay. Better? Okay. Thank you to the League of Women Voters, as well as City Club Tacoma, for tackling this very difficult question. You are going to be listening to some really passionate people who love their profession, and you're going to feel that passion come right across to you. And they'll be willing to answer questions and tell you about what they're doing. It's really an important topic for our time, because when people think about news, they often think about national news, and we all get a little bit overdosed maybe on national news. But the news that's really important to us is local news. Who's fixing the potholes on my street, what's happening at the public school system, who's running for city council. These are things that we need in order to get through our day. And it's becoming more and more challenging to do that in their profession. Many believe that journalists don't do a very good job of explaining their craft, their challenges, and really how the sausage is made. And that's been one of my mantras. My students that are here tonight, my former students, can attest to this, that one of my main mantras is media literacy, and how important it is that everyone knows how journalism works, how advertising works, who owns the media in their town, and who is really the ones who are making decisions about the media in my town. And I got hooked on this idea when I learned that much of the Western world outside of the United States makes media literacy education compulsory in secondary school. In Australia, high schoolers have to tell you what the purpose of advertising is and how advertising works. And they can tell you how a newsroom is put together and who makes the decisions in a newsroom. Same in France, Canada, the UK, and much of the Western world. I'm very happy to say in 2016, Washington State passed a law to make it compulsory in higher education and secondary education in Washington State, and they're in the process now of putting that curriculum together. So we are one of maybe 30 states that has recognized the importance of media literacy. So, and that's part of what we're here going to do tonight. This is exactly what we're going to do. This is media literacy, not 101, but maybe 401 for you here. And Dale Phelps brought this to my attention. According to the Pew Research on Public Opinion, 3/4 of people think that local news outlets are in good financial shape. That's 75% of the people questioned. And this one really breaks my heart, fewer than 1 in 6 pay for local news. Fewer than 1 in 6. So if you're one of the one, thank you. So essentially, people don't know that they need to pay for local news, is what it sounds like. Tonight, here's how it's going to go. I'm going to bring up these lovely people. They're going to tell you a little bit about themselves. We're going to talk to them for a few minutes, and then we're going to open it to you. So while you're listening, as I've always told my students, you need to be thinking of questions, because then we're going to turn it over to you, which is what a good media purveyor would do, is ask the audience for feedback. So we're following the mantra of our profession. Am I correct? So please join me, panelists. And what I'm going to do, they're going to come up and they're going to tell you a little bit about themselves first. And my very first question is embedded in what they're going to be talking about, which is, what does your organization consider local? What do you consider local? One of the parts of our title in this talk was news. We all kind of know what news is, but what do we all think local means? What does local mean in your organization? So I'm going to start with Lisa Patterson. Lisa, what do you do? Where do you work? What's your passion? And what does your organization consider local?
Oh, that was a lot of questions. I'm Lisa Patterson. I'm the editor-in-chief of South Sound Magazine and 425 Magazine. We're based in Tacoma, above Starbucks on North 30th Street. So if you want to come in, you're probably at Starbucks anyway, just come in or go to the spa and come on over. Anyways, I make lifestyle magazines. So our kind of thing from our bosses, we're a breath of fresh air. I write about new restaurants and design and home building and neighbors, people that you should know about. Like, is Cynthia Stewart here today? Hi, Cynthia. She's our Citizen of the Year. We're going to be honoring her. Nice to meet you in person. So we're going to be honoring her next week at our Best of South Sound party at the Museum of Glass. And that's really what I do. I make lifestyle magazines that are fun to read. They're a break from the everyday. Our company also does some more newsy things. We have South Sound Business Magazine. You might have known the Business Examiner. We took that over a couple years ago, rebranded it, and that's under our umbrella. And we also have 425 Business Magazine. However, I do not lead those two. 2 magazines is enough. So that's what I do.
What's local to you?
What's local to me is writing stories like Cynthia's story about how she's our Citizen of the Year. I mean, I've written about a lot of you in this room because everybody's doing something amazing. Neighborhood stories are still important. So news is very important, all different kinds of news. And back in the day, it used to be kind of like, oh, you know, you like to write fluff. Feature stories were fluff, but I think they're important too because it's about the people we know. And they can inspire you, they can empower you, they can get you dreaming about your next vacation and tell you about that restaurant you really need to eat at. And it's about enriching your lives. That's what a lifestyle publication is. And I think that's important.
Thanks. Dale. Whoops.
So what are the questions again?
What do you do and what's local to you?
What I do, I'm the editor of the News Tribune. So we are, I'm still the editor of the News Tribune.
What time is it?
So we're a general interest newspaper / website, so, with a broad kind of reach into what we would consider locals, probably Pierce County, but it depends on the topic a lot of times, because we cover, say, Major League Baseball. Seattle would be local. We cover state government. That would seem local. So local's a very difficult thing to pin down on, but largely, geographically, Pierce County, Tacoma would be the kind of thing that we would view as local, but it's a sliding thing. What are your other questions? I forgot.
All right. Okay. Hi.
I'm sorry,
Oh,
the
sure.
only local newspaper serving this area. Right?
My name is Matt. See, I'm a
He's a
radio.
radio
I'm a radio
guy.
professional, so it's I'm talking to a mic. My name is Matt Martinez. I'm the director of content for KNKX Public Radio, and that means I'm in charge of all of our editorial channels, including our news department, our music department, and all of our online and digital products. And what local news means for us as a station is much more of a regional focus because our signal is so far reaching. We like to say that we reach from Vancouver to Vancouver, and so we've made it our mission to try to cover as much of that area as possible. It's a lot to cover, it's a huge mission, but we try to do our best with the resources that we have, and everything that we report, we try to look at through that focus. We want to know if we're going to be reporting on it, if it's going to affect more people than just one town. Is it going to affect a region? Is it going to affect the entire, western half of Washington? So that's how we define local news.
I'm Robert McClure. I'm the executive director of Investigate West. we're kind of an unusual journalism organization, kind of a groundbreaking organization. We're a journalism studio. And I could talk more about later if you want to know why I call it that. But we basically look deeply into the environment, the environment and public health and government accountability. Do a lot of public records requests, sort of the in-depth stuff that's falling by the wayside in too many newsrooms nowadays. We were founded out of the demise of the Seattle Post-Intelligencer newspaper 10 years ago last month. Opened our first office on April Fool's Day of 2009. And somehow 10 years later, we're still standing. For us, local news, we called Investigate West because originally we were going to cover the whole West, and we realized that's insane. And so we pulled back to cover the Pacific Northwest. So to us, the Pacific Northwest is local. That's mostly Washington and Oregon. We've done work in BC, we've done work in Alaska, a little bit of work in Idaho, and then about 15, 20% of the stuff that we do goes national. But some of that has had very prolific and profound impacts here, such as Washington becoming the first state to ban a class of toxic sealants that we were putting onto various asphalts around this state. So that was carried through then MSNBC, now NBC News. But anyway, my point is, we do mostly regional, but we also do national, and sometimes national comes back to help us here locally.
Thank you. So we can't really talk about the death or life of local news if we don't sort of address, and this is in Media Literacy 101, if you don't address the business model, because while it's a cultural concept and it's a public service in many ways, news is, in this country, a business model. And we are so lucky to have a variety of journalism business models sitting up here so they can address, is this business model working for you? Has the digital revolution changed your business model? Give us some ideas on how you are addressing the bottom line. And anybody can start who wants to. Dale Phelps.
I'll start with that one, I guess, because we've been drastically affected by that. Once upon a time, a newspaper's business model would have been selling a lot of classified advertising, selling a lot of display advertising. You can remember the days when there were multiple pages of a department store, Macy's, Beaumarchais, whatever. And advertising paid for everything that we did. Your circulation dollars didn't pay for a lot beyond just the delivery. And so it paid for the newsroom and paid for the whole thing. When the internet age kind of started, that business model started eroding. Classified ads drift off to Craigslist. People figure out different ways to advertise on the web or digitally and those kinds of things. So our whole business model built on advertising, the advertising revenue goes straight down. And so then we start trying to say, well, okay, let's raise your subscription rates. And you've been used to paying not very much for the subscription, and all of a sudden we're saying, well, hey, you got to pay for this. And we have trained people to say there's not a lot of value in that because we weren't charging a lot for it. And now when we try to flip that, there's a tension there, obviously. So as we are evolving into a digital product, not as tied to the print, we have to make the value proposition to people that you need to pay for this work that we do. And it's a very difficult thing to make that transition. I think there's a generational thing, perhaps. In the early days of the web, when newspapers just put stuff out there for free, and you could just consume us. And now we're putting things behind paywalls and doing various things, trying to. Like I say generational, I think there was a time when people thought the internet was free, and now I think in the era of Netflix or buying games and stuff like that on digital things, people are recognizing that there is a value exchange, and the work we have to do is to persuade people that there is a value exchange. There is, what we do is worth you paying for. And, that's where we kind of are in our business, I think.
And still only 1 in 6 are actually paying for it. Six people are consuming it, and 1 person is paying for it.
Yes.
Luckily, we are all about asking people for money for stuff that we give them for free. And it's actually helped us quite a bit. We come to you every couple of months, maybe every 3 months, and we ask you to support the news that you hear and that you value. And one of the things that we do during those pledge drives is we tell you how it works. We tell you what your money goes toward. We tell you that it is for the reporting and the editing, and this is how we put a story together, and it pays for the transmitters, it pays for batteries for tape recorders, and it is really a media literacy program, and it's the value proposition that we're asking people to support. The other thing, as far as technology goes, we thought when the web started to take off that we're done, we're toast. No one's going to want to listen to radio. They said that same thing about television. When television came around, no one's going to want to listen to radio. Fortunately, the technology has caught up to a very old thing, and we are seeing a renaissance in the audio business with podcasts, and that's now extended to things like Alexa and Google Home, where you can now shout out, Alexa, play KNKX, and it'll just start streaming it, which is fantastic. And so we're kind of benefiting from that new technology. And I think that we're coming from a real position of strength in that area. We are now seeing lots of media organizations across the country trying to figure out whether there is something to take away from the model that was started out of desperation, really, and has now become something quite sustainable.
I have a quick question, too. I worked in public broadcasting, and one of the number one questions that we used to get when we were doing Pledge Drive was, but you're funded by the government. You don't need money from me. So what percentage do you get from the government?
We get 3% of our budget from the government, and NPR in general gets about 1% directly from the government. Yeah.
So why it's called public radio, it's really public, not government.
The question is how the innovation and technology has affected our business, right?
No, your business model. What's
Business
your
model, okay, sure.
Okay.
Well,
How do you make money, Robert?
right, so I was in newspapers for, 25 years before our corporate masters at the Hearst headquarters in New York, when I was at the Seattle Post-Intelligencer, decided to go online only and showed 90% of us to the door. And a few people decided we were going to do this crazy thing that we're doing that's actually now, 10 years later, done a lot of good. So I am really unhappy about the way that technology has affected the newspaper business, which was the bedrock of where most of the very deep reporting came from. Certainly, KNKX, KOW, others did that, but a lot of that got done right there at those newspapers that are now being decimated. So it's affected us in that we lost our jobs, and then we tried to build a new model, and we're still building that model and developing a community. I will tell you that I'll just lay it out there pretty early that I think that the people of Tacoma, you should be thinking about what is your new model going to be. With all due respect to Dale and the newspaper business, which I love, it's not going to go on that way forever. So you should be thinking about what you can do to preserve local news. And we can talk more about this, but there's some stuff going on in Philadelphia. There's a guy named Jerry Lenfest who had a lot of money. We don't have anybody around here with a lot of money, right?
Now, maybe somebody here Count us.
Maybe, but he actually turned the Philadelphia newspapers, which were touchstones for all investigative journalists for a long time, especially the Inquirer. They're now basically a public trust, a nonprofit public trust. And I think we need to preserve something like the TNT or do something so that we as citizens can be assured that we're getting straightforward and in-depth reporting. I'm probably rambling, so I'm going to stop there.
That's perfect. Lisa?
We have the advertising model, so we have paid subscriptions, but that's not how we make our money. We make our money off of advertisers. So that's how we're supported, and we're owned by a local gentleman named Josh Dunn. So we're very, very local. And we have about 28 people working on our staff, producing 4 different magazines. And that's from sales, production, front desk, everything. So we're pretty lean when you're thinking about 4 different magazines going out, 3 a month, sometimes 4 a month. Plus we have our online websites and social media presence for every single magazine. And then another thing we're doing is live events like this, where we have like the Best of the South Sound party, Best of 425 party, Women to Watch, 40 under 40, just lots of live events where people can meet each other in person. And so we make money off that through sponsorships and different kinds of engagement tickets.
So without giving away your actual cost of what you do, if you can give us some idea of what it costs to actually distribute this information to people on a regular basis, sometimes with asking for a minimal amount, sometimes giving it to them for free and hoping that they pay. What does it cost? And Robert, I wanted to speak directly to you about some investigative reporting that you've been doing that is significant work on foster children that has changed the Washington state law because of something that his organization did. What is the cost? What is the actual cost to do that kind of journalism?
Briefly, due to a lot of reporting we've done before, we were very interested in what was going on in the foster care system in Washington, and I developed a whistleblower inside the agency that started giving us a lot of information about how badly things had broken down there. And this actually came at a time, Seattle Times used to do a great job covering the foster care story, but this started around 2014-15 when they stopped doing much of that. To make a long story short, we developed the whistleblower, we came out with a series of stories. I engaged several reporters to do, and a really world-class photographer to go out and look into this. We found out that there was this relentless moving of kids between hotels and even sometimes sleeping in state offices because of the shortage of foster parents. So, then we documented what happened with the parents, with the social workers, and anyway, the point is that after about a year and a half of reporting, we were successful, I guess you would say. We made a difference in that the Washington State Legislature passed 6 new laws and $48 million in funding, and created a new state department to focus on this. I actually, we've been doing that work with our landlord. We're housed at Cascade Public Media, which is crosscut.com and KCTS9. And I just went back because we're renegotiating our contracts and things. And we spent about $51,000 over the last 2.5 years doing that work with staff time and then paying the various reporters, photographers, editors, data people who've done this work. And we've realized back about $12,000 in credit toward our rent. So the rest of the money has to be raised from the public and from foundations, philanthropic foundations. So that answers your question. That's the specific question you asked. Was there a larger question?
No, I'm just kind of giving people an idea, business-wise,
And-
how much it costs to do this. It's not easy.
And so that campaign had maybe, I should have done the numbers, but probably 10 to 12 stories. I mean, we figure any major story is going to cost us between like $5,000 and $10,000. I just got a grant for $10,000 for a major reporting project on public health, and that's going to cost about $21,000. So that gives, but that's probably a 3 to 4 parter. But it's the kind of thing that you used to see in the newspaper, spread across 2 or 3 pages. But we've had to adapt now. We're doing it with different websites. We're not in print anymore. So does that? I hope that helps.
I don't think everybody knows how costly these kinds of things are, everything that you do. So
And our people work for peanuts. I mean, the people who work for us do it because this is why they got into journalism. They generally have the contractors we work with generally have something else that pays them more, that allows them to go do this.
So how much does it cost to do what you do? Anybody else?
Sure. We have a budget of about $8 million for the station, and we spend about $3 million of that on programming, and that includes NPR fees. We pay NPR about $1 million a year to bring you the news programs that you hear every day, and the rest of it is devoted to our newsroom, which is about 15 folks, our music and our newsroom, and most of that is going toward reporting and salary and supplies, that sort of stuff. Yeah.
Dale, what does it cost to do what you do?
Well, I don't know that I should or supposed to attach a number to that, but it is millions of dollars. It is millions of dollars that we spend every year. It's obviously it's less, but there's a lot of things that go into, sometimes people sit around the newsroom and just imagine if we just all put our money together, we could buy this place and do a thing, and then you realize how much money is involved in operating all the various departments, the delivery, buying the ink, buying paper, buying the infrastructure, defending yourself legally. We get sued a lot, and we sue people sometimes, and that costs a lot of money. So I don't know the number. I know some numbers, but I probably shouldn't be talking about that. But it's a lot of money.
Costs a lot.
But we're talking about money here and stuff like that, and I don't want to make it sound like for us that I'm here with my tin cup saying, please, pay for me and stuff like that. I think that as the business models evolve and stuff, I think we need to make that case. And if we earn your confidence, then money will flow to a business that earns it. And so I hate to get involved in these conversations and talk about, oh, poor pitiful us. Yeah, things have changed, but there's a lot of innovative things going on in our business, in the digital realm especially. A lot of the things that Matt was talking about with your podcast and the things on the Alexa and those kind of things, we're getting into those kind of things. And we're not just a newspaper anymore. And so those are exciting things. And where the money is and all that, I'm not smart enough necessarily to know, but I know that we're going to innovate in those areas and try to do it. And we belong to a larger company. We belong to the McClatchy company that has 30 properties around the country. There's a certain amount of efficiency or a certain amount of throw weight that goes into being a part of a larger thing. So we've got a lot of smart people working on repairing or evolving to a different business model. So, I don't want to make it sound like, man, this is the worst possible moment. It's an exciting moment in the history of our business. He was talking about, once upon a time he thought TV was going to kill radio, and it hasn't. And I look at the newspaper business in the same way. Once upon a time, I'm sure radio was going to kill the newspapers, and it didn't. And TV was going to kill the newspapers, and it didn't. And now here we are in the internet era. We may not end up being a, quote, newspaper at the end of all this. But people need what we supply. And it's up to us to make that case that we're providing the thing that you need, and ultimately to repair a business model to make that exchange.
I just want Dale to know that while he didn't show up with his tin cup, I did, and it's going to be in the back of the...
Matt stole my line.
Lisa, what does it cost to do what you do?
I'm so glad I have no idea. I don't know. I know it's really expensive to make our magazines. They're printed on pretty paper, and they're bound, and they come out every 30 days. But I actually don't know. I know it costs a lot to pay people. It costs a lot in rent. Everything costs a lot of money. So we really do depend on our advertisers, online, in print, and all of our sponsors with our events to make things go round. But I know I'm always like being cautious about the money, and and just keeping my eye on the ball for media and what's next and what we can do better and smarter and faster all the time. I think if you're not keeping your eye on the ball, it changes. Things have changed so much in just 10 years. When we first started the magazines, they were quarterly, and they were small, and they've just grown and grown and grown, which is a good thing, but we've also added websites to all those, and social media, and all of that takes a lot of work to feed, lots and lots of areas to feed. So you gotta pay people, and we try to pay people fairly, and I think journalists should get paid a lot more across the board because it's important. Hearing how people have to do it because they have a passion for it. They told us that in journalism school. Oh, you do this because you have a passion for it? Well, I would argue it's really important. People should pay more because you need news all the way around. So that's the model I'd like to see us all work toward, paying people more, paying people what they deserve, because I'll tell you, this job is hard. Whether you're doing feature stories, or you're doing hard news, or you're doing investigative pieces, it's a hard job. We do love it, and that's why we all got into journalism, but I think that's a bunch of hogwash. Artists should get paid more, writers should get paid more. There's just a lot of people who do things that other people can't do or won't do who should get paid more. So that's my tin cup.
So, I mean, Dale didn't bring a tin cup, but some of the rest of you did. So what do we see as the future? What is the possible future model? How are we going to instill the value that all of you obviously have for what you do to everyone else, to those other 5 people who are not paying for it?
Okay, I'm going to jump in there. I think the future of maintaining the local reporting that we all value is that citizens really do have to get involved in funding it. And what KNKX has done has been astounding and wonderful. I came into this after quarter century in newspapers 10 years ago. I've been saying for a long time that really the way we need to go is citizen funding of news. Investigate West was a co-founder of something in 2009. We were only a few months old, called the Investigative News Network, which was nonprofit, investigative, and in-depth shops like ours around the country, about 25 of them. Over the years, it was only a couple of years later that we morphed it into something called the Institute for Nonprofit News. And that was because we kept on hearing from all these shops who weren't investigative, but were serving increasingly the needs of their country, of their communities, where newspapers were going away. And so, my other answer is that I think that those kind of shops should be combining with shops like KNKX or something like that, as has happened in, say, St. Louis. There are models where you can build And I don't know if the base of it would be KNKX or the TNT or what, and right around here. But you can build a model of a multimedia news organization. If we have one good one in every city, that'd be a good thing. It just seems like, I look up and down the coast here, Portland, Tacoma, Seattle. There are people out there, they may not be Jerry Lenfest, but if we got enough of them together, we could do this. That's my vision.
I've seen lots of nonprofit models across the country pop up as newspapers have gone away. It's happened in Denver, it's happened in Houston, and one of the newest ones is in Chicago, City Blocks Chicago, which is kind of a stunning project. It's former Sun-Times and Tribune reporters who got together to essentially cover Chicago block by block, and it's completely community funded. They actually started with a Kickstarter and were able to get it off the ground, and now have a full slate of reporters who are on the ground covering Chicago in that kind of way. Now, Chicago, of course, is a city that has enough people to support that size of an organization. So what does it mean to scale that for a place like the South Sound, for Tacoma specifically, is a really good question. But I think that we have some really good examples out there, and you combine that with the real knowledge of a public radio station, which is based here in Tacoma, and there could be some good things to come of that.
But it still doesn't answer, you've taken the next step past and created it, but how are we going to inject the public into that need, the need that is necessary, that you all know is necessary, that Thomas Jefferson said was necessary,
Yeah.
that we can recognize when local newspapers go away, the crime goes up in public places, in government, and in public
city
schools.
corruption goes up,
These
yeah.
are things that are documented. So do we need a crisis like what happened at KNKX to sort of wake people up to say, oh my gosh, we do need that?
I hope not, but I think that it could. Let's get to that point, which is what could really be lost, which is watchdog journalism. Even if it's just a story about what the city council did last night, it's so incredibly important to have this kind of reporting and conversation. When that goes away, then you have the fourth estate is not there to maintain accountability, and once we lose that, we're in a really, really, really bad place. I think it may take that. It may take that, especially on the local level. And I think that the reason people think that local is doing great is because there are these really flashy national examples of media organizations doing well, NPR being one of them, the Washington Post, the New York Times.
CNN is hiring.
The Guardian, they get lots and lots of fire under them, and people are like, oh yeah, the press is doing great, but when it comes to local, not so much.
I think your question is the key one. It's how are we going to do this? How are we going to engage the citizenry in understanding this market failure that is no longer providing the civic good that they have been getting and that we need in order to keep democracy honest? And the quick example is the Bell, California example. Tiny town down near Los Angeles that was sort of ignored for a long time. And then it turned out that this very tiny community they were paying their officials outrageous amounts of money, and nobody had noticed for years. And so finally someone noticed. But how many of those Bell Californias are going on in, I don't want to name down names. Did I say Puyallup? No, I didn't say Puyallup. Or whatever. I don't know where. I don't know, honestly. That's just, but wherever, or Tacoma, or Seattle, or whatever. We don't know. So that's the danger.
Is it going to take a crisis, Dale?
Well, I don't know. I guess I come at it from a point of view that our business or any of these businesses don't inherently have this right to exist. We have to make a case for ourselves. And there's a lot of businesses, look outside the newspaper business, that have faced these kind of crisis moments as well. I mean, you know, when I was a kid, I would have never imagined that Sears wouldn't exist or would be circling the drain. They were once upon a time doing a thing and fat and happy, and suddenly their business model didn't work anymore. People talk famously about Kodak all the time. You know, when I was a kid, they're doing film and everything's great. They invented digital photography, and then digital photography killed them. And so here we are. We're not a very nimble business. We're an old style business. And I remember, I think in the early 2000s, I went to some kind of future of journalism. We're always talking about the future of journalism. Future of journalism thing in, I think it was in Phoenix. And we had a bunch of these kind of startup people. This is a .com era, and they're talking to us. And they're talking about, they make a thing, and if it doesn't work, they remake it tomorrow. And they say, how do you guys do it? And we're like, well, we would create a new section, study it for 9 months, put it into a focus group and stuff, and you know, in a couple of years we might change something. And you realize then that we're not nimble enough to compete in what was coming at us in a kind of a modern era, and it's only gotten worse since then. And I think we've changed a lot of it, trying to figure out how to alter our approach to challenge in the marketplace. There's a lot of things that we do digitally now. I think the same survey that we were talking about with the Pew thing, you know, people get their news, local news, from largely 2 different places nowadays. That's television and digital. And the newspapers are way down there. So we've got to play in the digital field. You got to fish where the fish are. And so I think a lot of the innovations that we try to do to figure out how to draw an audience on the digital side, that's the answer for us, if there is an answer, but that's the answer for us. We just can't keep doing the thing we're doing. We got to do something new.
I think media literacy will probably be the answer that Joanne's really looking for, and she would be right. I think we need to teach people where their news is coming from. We hear these words like fake news. What the heck is fake news? I don't even know what fake news is. I know a lot of people who make news, and it's hard work. But you do need to know where now your news is coming from, and if it really is news, because if it's from an organization that you know and you trust, then you can trust that that information has went through a process before it came to your eyes, and it's been fact-checked, and it's real. With digital everything now, sometimes you just don't know who's trying to give you what information. So media literacy starts with kids, and I'm really excited to hear that, you know, it's going to be taught in schools young, because we need that. And I think we all in this room, including us, always need to kind of keep check on what is real news, what's real media, what's a real organization, how are they gathering it, who owns them, just how they play the game. Because a long time ago, it used to be there were ads and there was editorial, and on the editorial side, editorial did their thing and ads did their thing, and they were separate. There's a lot of organizations that look like a magazine or look like a newspaper or sound like a radio podcast, whatever you're looking at on a website, that look like news, but you know, there's who owns them? Where's this coming from? So I think we all need to do our own homework and be careful on where we're getting our information and which information we believe, and be smart stewards. And I think that kids need to be educated earlier and learn about what media, how it works and how it should work, and what real media is and what everybody else is doing to try to grab your attention, because there's different tiers of professionalism in all jobs. But right now with the internet, you need to be careful, and you need to be educated, and you need to read a lot of things and use your common sense. So again, media literacy would be my answer, Joanne.
You get the test score.
She used to be my teacher, so,
You win. So we talked a little bit about possibly having an angel out there that would swoop into Tacoma and say, you need a concentrated local news source that has unlimited funds and can cover all the important stories from the legislature to what's happening at the Mariners and still serve the Pierce County, Tacoma area. So what would that look like? What would, in your fantasy world of local news, I know Robert already has an idea, but what would it look like to you? You are the experts here. Well, if we could wiggle our noses or something and it would happen right now, what would it look like to these folks, the audience? What would the audience be? What would be available to them as consumers?
Well, first of all, I look forward to hearing what the other three panelists have to say about this. That's one of the reasons I'm here tonight, so we can all have an exchange of ideas. First of all, I don't think anyone's swooping in. I mean, what I'm talking about, the thing that I've advocated for here earlier already, is a news organization that is community-based, community-focused, community-funded. That's going to be somebody who cares about this place. It's probably not going to be somebody who cares maybe initially about the media and news, but I think as we go forward, we can see that we aren't getting what we need as citizens, and so it has to be a public-minded, and I wouldn't say person. It's like I said, Jerry Linfest has a lot of money from, I don't remember how he made his money, but I knew it one time. But anyway, the point is, he doesn't have to worry about that. And there are people like that, one with the initials BG, who has an office right across the street from us. So we're in the KCTS studios, and right across is the Gates Foundation. And it's like, all the money is over there. We've gotten $5,000 from them in our entire existence. So anyway, the point is,
Pocket change for them.
I don't think the answer is one person swooping in. I think as I look at how what's going on in Philadelphia could be expanded, it's more about a lot of people like the people in this room talking to a lot of their friends and figuring out how to go forward. Now, like I said earlier, I don't know what the base, the platform is. There could be more than one. We're focused on the environment and public health and government accountability. This is the nonprofit news movement is what I'm trying to energize. And I do think that there's a great value in what all of these organizations are doing, and we don't want them to go away.
So essentially, this could be just like a tax shelter for somebody, really, right? They start a nonprofit news organization, and they get to not have to pay taxes on it. Let's put that idea in some people's heads.
Yeah, I don't think I'd want one organization to be covering all of the news. I think that there should be several organizations, even if it is several nonprofit organizations. We actually have that here. We have KUOW, we have KNKX, we have other nonprofit media competing for the same nonprofit media dollars, like KEXP, King FM, music stations. And I think it's a healthy environment. And of course, it is a unique environment. Folks who have the ability to give to media organizations like this, and also a fairly young new workforce spilling into our region. So if I could snap my fingers, I would say, yeah, a couple of media organizations, several media organizations that are able to do broadcast and print and compete against one another would be fantastic, and hire reporters and pay them benefits, and that would be pretty swell. Yeah.
Dale, what do you think? What's your ideal? Pie in the sky.
Well, I'm not sure a big pile of money is the answer. It would help. I'm not sure a big pile of money is the answer. It would help. It'd be like, giving me a big pile of money to be better looking tomorrow. I'm not going to be better looking tomorrow. I'm just this. We still have to figure out how to go out and grab an audience, whether I have $100 million or I have $3 million. It's still a challenge to figure out how to make this pivot into the world where people are carrying around a device that they're getting all their news from. And maybe a bunch more money would help you get there faster, I don't know. But I'm not looking for that savior there. I think we've got to dig out of it ourselves, and a lot of that is figuring out how people consume news. Because 20 years ago, 40 years ago, whatever, we would take a newspaper and put a bunch of stuff in it and dump it on your porch, and I don't really know whether you're reading all of it. I was assuming you were, because we did it, and I was assuming you're reading it. Now we know which stories people are reading. We have ways to figure that out. And we know we write a certain type of story in a certain way, people are going to read it. And if we write a certain type of story in another way and people don't read it, and we have to learn. I don't want to blame the audience for our problems. The comedian, Jerry Seinfeld, one time he's talking about telling jokes, and he tells a joke in St. Louis one night and it kills. And the next night he's in Milwaukee and he tells the same joke and nobody laughs. And he said that most comedians would say, well, these people in Milwaukee are just stupid. And he goes, no, he didn't tell it right the next night. It's always his fault. He didn't do it right. And I kind of view that as, in our situation too, is if we've got something valuable, if we've got something you need, we need to figure out how to convince you that that's the case. And we need to make our way in the marketplace. And waiting for somebody to dump a bunch of money on us and stuff, that may happen, but I don't think that's the path to victory for us.
What's your scenario?
I like people to dump money, buckets of money on me. No. Let's see. There we go. I'm just constantly, we're doing really well right now. But I'm always trying to figure out what's the next thing. What can I tell you that you don't already know about your community before you find out about it? So I'm always trying to be ahead of whatever the trends are, always trying to be first in the hottest place before you get in there so we can be, before the news. I'm trying to stay ahead of trends. So our news is obviously more lifestyle focused, and what they're saying is super important. Without watchdogs in our government and paying attention to what's going on, things are not going to be awesome. I've worked in the newspaper world before. I've come from that place, but for me, I'm just trying to stay ahead of trends and trying to tell you what I think you want to know. And I'm also always asking our readers, what do you want to know? What can we do better? When you come to an event and you buy a ticket, it's electronic, and then it comes back to you with a survey after the event to tell us how we can do better. Did you like the food? Did you get your drinks fast enough? Was the entertainment good? What can we do better? Our Best of South Sound and Best of 425 awards, all the time I ask you, what do you want to see on this list? It's reader generated, you voted for the whole thing, now you have a whole issue that reflects you. So I'm always trying to connect back to the community, and I know, my topics aren't as heavy as theirs, but that's how I keep ahead of things. And the biggest compliment I ever get is, hey, I read a story in South Sound Magazine, or I read a story in 425 Magazine. I had no idea that was down the street. I can't wait to go. Or I can't wait to buy it or see it. Or I didn't know Cynthia, but no, she's going to be famous. No, but just like I didn't know about that. So if I didn't know about that and I found out about it in South Sound, now all of a sudden it is relevant and you need to subscribe to it and people want to advertise in it because they know you're reading it.
So you had some homework when I started, right? You had to generate your own questions. And I'm sure they are just bubbling up. I've had a couple of people already wave to me that they have questions. So let's open this up to the audience here, to the consumer, in a way. And please, Ray, have it.
So we've seen...
Oh, we got a mic coming to you.
Okay, so we've seen changes in music, how people purchase albums. Thank you. How people purchase their music, how people purchase things on Amazon. Have your organizations looked at switching your model instead of having a upfront subscription fee to a per story fee? And have you considered the advantages, disadvantages of that model?
We have not, but what we've been able to do is take advantage of the models that have been developed by digital media companies, entertainment companies like Netflix and Spotify that charge $10 a month, which just so happens to be the public radio sustainer model. So it's very easy to sell people on that. Our listeners, it's only $10 a month, and you're basically paying for it like you would one of those services. It's unlimited. It's there for you every day. If that's the kind of thing that is easy for you to do, then you can do that. So not story bit by bit, but as a package service per month, definitely.
Well, I know we're trying to do several things kind of on the subscription side that are a little different. Once upon a time, we would just be saying on digital, this is what it costs to be a digital subscriber. Now we're trying to carve it in the niches a little bit. For example, sports, one of the big traffic drivers for us is the Seahawks, and a lot of that traffic comes from outside of this market. So you're somebody in Minneapolis or something, you're interested in the NFL, and you read something about the Seahawks. So you live in Minneapolis, you read a couple of stories about the Seahawks on the News Tribune, and then all of a sudden you hit the paywall and it's asking you to pay whatever we charge, $30 to buy a subscription to the News Tribune. Well, you're living in Minneapolis, you don't want to know what's happening in the city council in Tacoma, et cetera. Well, we have designed a smaller niche product called Sports Pass, which you can just get the sports portion of our website. So we've seen some success with that. A lot of the papers are in our company in similar kind of sports markets are seeing the same kind of thing. I think we'll evolve that approach because, in your everyday life, this is probably how you consume news nowadays. You kind of drill into the things you're interested in, and whether it's music or arts or sports or government or whatever it is, as we get more sophisticated in recognizing who's coming to us and what they're reading, we will be designing niche products that you can buy kind of piecemeal like you're talking about, rather than just saying, here's everything, take it or leave it.
We don't charge online. So basically, you can go to the grocery store and buy our magazine for about $6, or you can subscribe and you get it for a screaming deal. We run deals all the time, so ask. Or sometimes you'll get like $40 gift card to a spa. And so when you go online, there's no paywalls of any kind. There's some unique content online that you won't get in print, and then a lot of the print also goes online. And that's kind of sounds old-fashioned, but for me, community engagement is what makes our companies work, because we're uber local, and so I want to engage as many people as possible. So I just give it all away. Really, I give a lot of stuff away.
Question?
So, some observations and questions. 40 years ago, when we were talking about print journalism, the business model was 60% advertising, 40% circulation. And I want to find out what that business model is now. I know at that time there was an inherent tension between the advertising and the editorial because you did not want to have that inherent bias of writing to the people who paid for your content. I want to find out how that has changed over the years. The elephant in the room about the Angel, nobody mentioned the name Jeff Bezos, who in fact saved the Washington Post as the publisher. And although I don't know this as fact, I believe that he probably does not have that much influence on the editorial content. But I'd like to find out your views about that.
I'm heavier on editorial than I am on ads. We aim for 60-40.
Currently, we make more revenue on the, what we would call circulation side than we do advertising. That's flipped.
So that model has
in
flipped.
our industry. What was the other part of your question? I'm sorry.
The editorial.
Oh, editorial. Yeah, you know,
Dictation.
I've been working in newsrooms for 40 years, and I do think that there was a time in the newsroom that journalists kind of resented the idea that our company would even make money because that seemed kind of dirty. I think that's changed a little bit when we realized that, you know, we need to make money to stay in business. And it's flipped the way people have to approach their jobs. It's not necessarily selling or whatever, but you realize the connectedness between what you do and how it pulls in revenue, particularly on the circulation side. So every reporter, editor, kind of has to be a little entrepreneur to say, I've got this story, how am I going to go sell it to you? And whether that's through the headline or the SEO and those kind of things that we pay attention to nowadays, people are probably more sensitive to the market than they would have been 40 years ago, because I was in a newsroom 40 years ago and we weren't thinking about that. You know, we're just putting the thing together and fat and happy. And now it's a challenging environment, and you really have to think about, how am I going to package this one story and go do it? Because in the days when the newspaper was heyday, I package it all and I sit it on your doorstep, and these are the things you read. Now, you come to us one story at a time. Nobody just calls up the newstribune.com, or very few people do, and just start plowing through all the stories that are on there. You see a story on your phone, somebody sends you a link, you see it on Facebook or Twitter or whatever, and you come in for one story. And most people come in for one story, and you turn and read that, and you turn out and don't read another story. So every little story has to defend itself and acquire an audience. And that's the big change, I think, from the newsroom point of view, is we recognize we have an obligation to the audience to pull you in and try to get you to read more than that one story.
I think, too, what she's getting at is that the perception to most of the audience is that if somebody paid you, if Bon Marché paid you, that you wouldn't do any stories about the Bon Marché. And I remember years and years ago the story about the Bon Marché in the Seattle Times. And they did a story, and the Bon Marché said, we're going to pull our advertising if you run that story. They ran the story. Bon Marché pulled their advertising and ended up crawling back because they weren't getting any more customers. I mean, it's not going to work now because a Bon Marché or Macy's advertising comes in flyers and comes on the TV and everywhere else, but it used to be this was the only place people went for Bon Marché information, and they ended up shooting themselves in the foot. Robert.
You kind of stole my thunder with something local. I was going to say, you know, I was in newspapers for 25 years before the last 10 at Investigate West. we never thought about what the advertisers thought. It was like,
Yeah.
literally, I never thought about it. And when something like some kind of influence like that happened, you'd see it in the Columbia Journalism Review. It was very unusual.
It was embarrassing.
And
if
my
anybody
example is
caved.
from the Sun Sentinel in Fort Lauderdale, where a really great consumer reporter named Bob Knotts did, I can't remember what the used car dealers were doing, but they were doing something untoward. And we stripped it across the front of the Sunday paper and landed on everyone's doorstep. And like the next day or two, the guys were in the editor's office, Earl Mocker, and said, you gotta retract that and blah, blah, blah. And he wouldn't do it. And they said, well, we're leaving. And it's just like the Bon Marché story. They left, and 3 weeks later, they were back. Well, that is not what's happening now. So that monopoly, which was perhaps not a good thing, is gone. And Dale made reference to this. There are these different things that people are coming into this platform to get. They used to support each other, and they don't so much anymore. And so that's a difference that I haven't figured out. I do think we need some common frames of reference, and that's why I advocate healthy nonprofit news organizations that are multimedia and that can bring people value.
Yes.
I came here tonight to hear about the news, not about the business models and all the other kinds of things. And to me, we are in a crisis in this country, and it's a crisis of left to right. There's a crisis top to bottom. And to me, the local news has to bring that national picture, which we are obsessed with every day, down to the Tacoma region and accurately report different sides of it, do editorials that really get us to think about the impact, and even stories, news stories, about the impact of the changes in policy, not just the politics, but the whole shift that's happening with every government agency at the national level. The shift in the world, the look at the world. How do we get, what I want is, and we'll get the News Tribune or listen to NPR and KNKX and the reporting that's done. So I want you to talk about the news, the purpose we're here, and what you think about how you present the news.
I've actually been thinking about this, for the past hour and how to talk about this. But I think one of the worst things that we have done as the media is to inject the idea of being objective into the public consciousness. I think that it's so incredibly damaging. I just don't think objectivity exists when it comes to reporting. There's so much subjectivity to life experience that's brought to the story by the reporter, whether it's acknowledged or not. They might not even know that it is coming out in their reporting. The best I think that we can do for a community is to get to the truth of something. And there is subjectivity in that. There are not two sides to the truth all the time. There are facts, of course, but facts can be used to prove a whole lot of things. If you're a policy debater, have ever done policy debate, you know this. And to your point about how do we make things that are local and meaningful to people that are national issues? I don't know how much we can do that, but what we can do best of all is report deeply on our communities using that idea and tell people that, yeah, we are going to be coming at these stories from that angle, from that perspective, and we're going to try to get to the truth of the matter as best we can. It's not exactly a answer to your question, but as much as I can.
But what you have in your national news is you have a plethora of places to go. The only place you can go for local is these people sitting up here.
All the national is going to apply here. So I'm just saying it's a combination of, yes, the many sources, but what does that mean for us?
But the best business model is present something that nobody else can present. CNN can't tell any stories about the Tacoma City Council. They can't. They never touch it. They never will care unless somebody shoots somebody there, But this is what these people can do well and deeply care. And they obviously deeply care about their communities.
I think one thing that's happened, and maybe to your point a little bit, is the way things have kind of shaken out in the age we're in. Once upon a time, you would have had, say, a newspaper or the 3 television networks or something. There's a limited amount of shared facts that we had together. And then we could begin a conversation off that set of shared facts. Whereas now, there's so many sources, many credible, many not, but you can kind of dumb down or heighten your own experience by drilling into one side of something and never be exposed to another side of things. And so that's one thing that, you know, is a challenge for us now, because we don't have kind of that monopoly interest in saying, here's a set of facts that we can all talk about. Because we all have our own set of facts, we're all looking at our own phones, we're all looking at various things. So, yeah, it is a challenge. The format that's evolving makes that kind of conversation you're talking about hard.
Hi. So I have a question about, now that we went from a centralized news source to a diffuse one, like Mr. Phelps just said. But so in order to deliver the news like the previous person asked, you know, the newspaper gives so much space to ads and a small space to the news. The internet on your screen gives a large space to ads and a small space in the center to the reader. It's not effective for the reader to have our screen or our page consumed by ads, by that focus. So the ad model is not giving us local news. How are you going to give us local news without taking all the real estate from our computer screens or from our phones or from our newspaper page? How can you give us local news? If you're depending on ads, that's an old model. It's kind of like the buggy whip got disintegrated by the automobile, or the Swiss-made timepiece got disintegrated by Swatch and the quartz crystal. Local news has been disintegrated. When I watch NPR or listen to NPR, I hear the same story 4 times in a 40-mile drive. It's not even the same story, it's the exact same recording. The content is not new at that point, and they're gearing it for, you know, a shorter listener, shorter attention span. There's no deep dive into the local. You know, even, you know, Seattle stories don't mention Tacoma. The Seattle traffic stories don't mention the South Sound, maybe 1 out of 4 times. The South Sound, but the North Sound, they do say traffic. So there are inherent biases that you guys say we need to look at ourselves and then to find out what the people want. Well, you're not going to find out what Tacoma wants if you keep the same biases that have been since the aroma of Tacoma 40 years ago. That wasn't a question.
There's a question up here, Kristen. Her hand has been up for a while, and then over there.
Maybe I have a couple of questions you can just answer. Okay, well, I was thinking of this 2 questions back, so piggybacks on Terry in the last. But as a citizen, I need to vote. I need to understand what's happening locally. And basically, this goes more to the Tribune, that's a daily, that can put this kind of information out every day. You talked about tracing stories, and you know what kind of stories, at least online, get more readers, and so you're beefing those up, or you're trying to present the story in a way. I understand that. You have to do that. That's the business model. My question is, does this allow room in your mission statement? I assume you have a mission statement at the Tribune, that even if it's not a moneymaker, this little piece of what all our local politicians are doing and what is happening in local organizations, that is very important for people to be effective citizens in this community, you will do those. You will assign a certain number of reporters to cover those stories, even though they are not the ones that everybody's clicking on, just because you see that as your mission. So is there a mission to do that?
Yes. I think we're seeing a couple different things. I'm talking about ones that drive clicks, like the stories you're just talking about. That's one thing. But we also know there's another type of story we do, another type of journalism that drives what we would call conversions into subscribers. That someone like you would say, this is very valuable to me to look at city council elections or the kind of things you're talking about, and you would say, this is something I want to buy for that. So we're kind of trying to look at two tracks. The things that we know gather a lot of interest, say a Seahawks story or something like that. No city council story is ever going to get the kind of traffic that a Seahawks story does. But we know that it's an important part of a community for us to pay attention to that kind of thing. And so as we work toward a subscriber model more than selling ads against clicks model, that's our approach.
And that's exact. I believe that is what the Tribune is doing, and it's an honorable thing to do. But that's what I'm saying to you guys is we need to have support for those kinds of in-depth stories. And people, it's always been we called the newspaper the Daily Miracle because it comes out every day, and it had everything from the national news all the way down to the comics, and I still read the comics every day. That's how I started reading the newspaper when I was 7 years old. So it was all there, and we don't have that anymore. It's become uncoupled, and yet that important news that you asked about, it was a great question. That's what we need to figure out how we can preserve and get out to the people who need it as citizens to vote.
Thank you. First of all, I want to say thank you to all of you for doing this. This is a critical issue in this community and most communities anymore. We really don't have the local news that would really bolster our government and our democracy. So thank you for this conversation. There are two trends that you've discussed that really concern me. One of them is the trend towards audio, which radio, lots of podcasts, that kind of thing. For an aging population who are losing their hearing, that isn't a particularly helpful trend. The second one was the one about people are going to their interests. So people go to a particular article or a particular interest. The thing that the newspaper used to have to offer, and some magazines do, is a whole spread. So you actually read the news along with the other stuff, and that doesn't happen anymore. So some of us locally have been talking about how to create a nonprofit, how to create a journalism mechanism that would actually provide local, real news about what's going on in our government. And you talked about the cost of an investigative reporter, and to me it sounds pretty analogous to the cost of a policy analyst at a big county or a big city or something like that. So what is the relationship between the staffing cost and the other production cost in an online news mechanism? How could we possibly estimate what it would really cost to do something like that?
Two questions. I'm going to there's two questions there. I'll take a shot at the last one, if I could. If we had, our budget this year is $286,000. The Columbia Journalism Review said something like, Investigate West may have a tiny newsroom and a small staff, but their impact consistently belies their size, something like that. So that's what we're doing. We're doing it super on the cheap. If we had a double the budget, we could do probably 4 times more. So we're kind of at that stage. So I can answer that part of the question. Is that helpful? Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, people who sat next to me in newsrooms would be very surprised to know that I was ever underspoken. I was saying that we're doing it really on the cheap, $286,000 a year. We could increase output quite a bit with twice that much money.
Yeah, that's a good question.
I don't know how to address the audio problem, that trend. turn your radio up really, really, really loud. That is the very, very rude answer.
Oh, I have a question. My observation is that radio KNKX is doing very well, as you said. South Sound Magazine is hitting their numbers with the events and doing different things for a business model. And it seems like Investigate West is doing their thing. But the TNT, I'm sorry, Dale, but everyone likes to hear what you actually have to say. I've noticed that this past couple years that reporters have been lost from like Sean Robinson, Candace Rood, and Sue Kidd. Yes, I love to read Sue Kidd about new restaurants.
No, you're not supposed to know who she is.
Oh, well, I don't know what she looks like, but I read her articles. And I've also known that we lost our local publisher, and we now have a publisher that's kind of, I think, in Idaho. Is that correct? Or
She is responsible for Idaho. She does live here.
she lives here, okay. And I've heard some people tell me that the News Tribune has actually gone thinner, at least those who still receive the paper. I get the digital subscription, and I pay. But people are wondering, like you said, you had to be nimble. And the younger generation, I think, consumes news just a little bit differently. I've heard from other people who say that I want them to focus a lot on the local because I can get my national from television, from internet. So how do you think you're, like with your limited resources, I mean, these are two questions actually. With your limited resources, with less reporters, what kind of issues or stories are you focusing on? And second, how do you think you are going to turn around the News Tribune? Because from all the stories that I've been listening to with the loss of reporters, the thinning out of the paper, it doesn't look good, and everyone else here is saying we're doing great.
Well, if you were trying to cheer me up.
Sorry, Dan.
Well, to answer your second part of your question, I do think, we have come to the realization that local is our bread and butter. You're not going to come to us routinely to read about Donald Trump or Brexit or whatever it is in the world or nation. That what we offer uniquely is what is local, however that's defined, but largely, what affects you living in this community. So that's the thing we would want to focus on. As far as staff losses and stuff, there's no question that we've lost a lot of people. I started working at the News Tribune in September of 1998. We had 130-some people in the newsroom. Now we have 20-something in the newsroom, okay? So obviously, journalists are not good at math, but 130 is a lot bigger than 20-something. And so, however the math works out on that, on how much less you can do with 130 as against 20-some people, I don't know. I'm hopeful. We offered a job to a woman the other day who's going to start working next week. We've got some jobs that are coming online that we're going to be hiring for, so I think we're going to, I never would say we're turning a corner, that's too optimistic, but I think we're going to start making some progress again, particularly in covering local government, because we know we've kind of not done as well recently because we haven't had the staffing. We're adding some staffing that's going to address that. So,
Thank you. Someone, I have to go. Okay, last question.
Well, that's no pressure. Can everyone hear me? We've talked a lot about the question of loss here, and so for me, the question is, while I'm fascinated by the economics as someone who studies media economics, the question that I've been dying to ask all panel is, can you give us an example of a story that you lost because of the funding model, the decline of the size of your newsroom? As you're trying to connect with us and tell us why this matters, what is the thing that we lost? What is something that you could have helped us with that you didn't get to?
I will try and come up with a specific example. Well, I can think of a specific example, but I'll tell you about it in a minute. But what I wanted to say was, back in the glory days of newspapers, and when I didn't have to worry about those advertisers, I still had to sell stories to my editors. That always had to happen. But we basically didn't care what the advertisers thought. So the difference with nonprofit news, is, and this is something to think about, is, we're about 75% foundation funded. Some of that comes from like the Ethics and Excellence in Journalism Foundation or something like that just cared about journalism. But some of it comes from places like the Bullet Foundation, which is an environmentalist foundation. We're covering certain areas that they would, they have a lot to do with urban sustainability. Well, back when I worked at the newspaper, I spent a lot more time as a reporter, I was a reporter then, up in the Cascades or out in the wilds and places like that. But you know what? Those places are, the drawback of nonprofit news is some of the amount of money that you're getting that is completely unrestricted is not 100% of your budget. So that does affect story choice in a way that I really didn't have to deal with in the for-profit world. So, the most recent one was Lisa Stifler and I had done a bunch of things back at the PI about basically a huge loophole in the Endangered Species Act, which allowed what we call the Forest and Fish Agreement in this state about timber. Anyway, I recently came upon this really interesting, and it was about something called habitat conservation plans that really should be called habitat destruction plans. Anyway, recently I came across a case of one down here. It's a little farther south of here. I don't remember exactly where, but basically it's windmills that are going up, wind turbines that are going up that are going to kill endangered species. I was very interested in the story, but I had to, in the final analysis, I had to look at all the other stories we're trying to do, and that one dropped off. And one reason is I don't have funding for that. So that's kind of the new world, this nonprofit world that I'm talking about. I don't want you to think that there aren't going to be trade-offs and a lot of important decisions to be made. And that's why I think those decisions need to be shared among the body corporate.
I can't think of a specific thing that we lost, like we weren't able to do that story. I think we always try to give our reporters who come to us and say, this is a really important story, we really should be covering this, the opportunity to do it. I would say that we may do less than we want to do because we don't have the resources to allow that person to stay on the story for a certain length of time. So we do lots of intense work and then we move on to the next thing. And we've decided that what we want to do is focus on those things that are regional, like I started out saying, so that we have a lens by which we can make those decisions. I think a good example would be this past weekend, the crane collapse in Seattle. We decided that, what were we going to add to that story that the other news organizations weren't going to be able to tell? And so it was both an editorial choice and also a budget choice. We're a union shop, so it would mean putting people on overtime to cover the story on the weekend, not just audio reporters, but also digital reporters. We did, put something up, but it was, I think AP copy and some other light reporting. So it's not like we lose things, but we certainly do less at times when we wish we could do more.
Well, this is a big question. You could go for a long time on this one. Specifically, things that come to mind for me is we're very good at breaking news. That's been one of the hallmarks of the News Tribune for a long time. But recently, I think we do the breaking news, and then we don't have the wherewithal to do the follow-up. If you think about a couple of things recently, last summer when the fella hijacked the plane and ended up crashing on the island over here, okay, we were all over that night, did a lot of good work, but we don't have the manpower to do the stories, to find out how this guy got in the airplane and how all this broke down along the way. We didn't do those stories. When the train derailed here a couple of years ago, we were really good on the ground that day, had people all over it talking about that. We haven't had the manpower to go back and talk about how did this happen, how can we prevent that from happening again. And that's a real loss for this community and for our newspaper to not to be able to do those kind of things. Beyond that, I think where we have cut back is the breadth of things that we do. You were talking about Sioux Kid and food and those kind of things, but all those lifestyle things that we used to do that were in part of a daily features section, which was when you're taking the newspaper and you're running into a lot of things about entertainment or food or fashion or whatever it is, we don't serve that audience very much anymore. Sports is the same thing. I came here 20 years ago to be the sports editor, and a lot of it was the News Tribune had a national reputation of being a terrific sports section. We spent a lot of money traveling with these teams and doing all those kind of things. We don't do that anymore. So people tell me, hey, you're the best sports section in the Northwest. I think we were at one point, but we're not spending the kind of money now that would justify that. We do what we can, we do very well, but the resources hem us in a little bit more than I think I would like. So those are my examples, I think.
You cover what you want.
Cover what I want. No, like anybody though, if I had a bigger budget, we'd do more things. There's a lot of, I'm constantly have a list of things I'd like to do, but there's only so many writers, so much time in a day. So basically, if there was more money, then there would be more writers, there'd be more stories, and the internet's infinite, so we could post them all day there, and we'd have more pages in the magazine, but it doesn't really apply to me, though.
Please join me in thanking our great panelists. Obviously passionate about what they do, which is what I sort of feed off of, the passion. It's just wonderful. We know that the future of local news is in good hands, I think. And if there is an angel out there, just see any one of these people and they'll figure out how to take your check. And thank you to the City Club and to the League of Women Voters for bringing this question up. I think we could spend all night here and talking about this. I'm sure everybody has a question. Thank you for your kind attention.
Well, thank you all for coming tonight. I'd like to thank again Dr. Joanne Lisowski for moderating our panel, and to all our panelists, Lisa Patterson of South Sound Magazine, Dale Phelps of the News Tribune, Matt Martinez of KNKX, and Robert McClure of Investigate West. Thank you for educating us on the future of the local press and media literacy. And I'd just like to thank again the League of Women Voters, and congratulations to Cynthia Stewart for being South Sound Women of the Year. And thank you all for coming, and especially to our members whose support allows us to do programs like this tonight, as well as video record and do programs like our last month with Tacoma Mayor Victoria Woodards. That program is available online at our website at www.cityclubtacoma.org. And thank you, and have a good night.